Okay, good afternoon, folks. I call this meeting of the Standing Committee on Government Operations back to order. My name is Julian Morris. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake and chair of this committee. Before proceeding, I'll ask members to introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Reid online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my name is Kate Reid. I am the MLA for Great Slave here in Yellowknife. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have a member in the room as well.
Good afternoon. I'm Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Okay, thank you for joining us, Ms. Morgan. So this afternoon, we're pleased to welcome Honourable Vince McKay, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs, who joins us remotely to discuss the active living and safe sport frameworks. Thanks to you and your staff for joining us this afternoon, Minister. Please proceed with your opening remarks, and then we'll go through your presentation and, of course, open the floor to MLAs after that.
Perfect. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss with committee the ongoing work in the implementation of both the Active Living Framework and the NWT Safe Sport Framework, sorry. With me today are Gary Brennan, Deputy Minister, Allison Brown, Director of Sport, Recreation and Youth, Debbie Delancey of DJ Delancey Consulting, who is supporting the implementation of the Active Living Framework, and Jeff Ray, Ministerial Special Advisor. Also, we have Aaron Wells from Indigenous Sports Circle, Bill Hoffmer from Sport North, and Damon Crossman with MACA as Manager of Sport. The GNWT is working with partners including the Indigenous Sports Circle, NWT Recreation and Parks Association, Sport North Federation, Mackenzie Recreation Association, and more than 30 territorial sports organizations to improve active living and sports systems in the NWT. The Active Living Framework, completed in the fall of 2023, was informed by public engagement and sets out the GNWT's vision, priorities, and goals for active living to guide the GNWT planning and discussions about allocation of funding for active living. Active Living partner organizations continue to work collaboratively with MACA on implementation, which includes drafting an active living action plan and a corresponding monitoring and evaluation framework, along with ongoing governance and policy support to improve organizational capacity. Nationally and territorial, we continue to see negative effects of not having adequate safe sport systems in place. Work is ongoing across all provinces and territories to strengthen sport integrity systems and implementation of third-party mechanisms. New sport integrity application processes and phase changes to the upcoming funding contribution for sports and recreation are planned to begin on April 1st, 2026. This concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chair. If the committee agrees, our consultant Debbie Delancey and Allison Brown, the Director of Sport and Recreation and Youth, are available to provide a presentation on the Active Living Framework and Sport Framework, Safe Sport Framework. After the presentation, I look forward to some discussion and questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Delancey. Sorry, I thought they would just go over to you.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was taught never to speak until the chair recognizes you. So I don't know what the technology is for advancing the slides. Okay, thank you. Okay, so much. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. You've got a lot of information, and I'm not going to read the information that you've been provided in the speaking notes, but just try to go through the slides quickly and give a little bit more context. So this first slide is an introduction which really highlights the extent to which the Active Living Framework responds to the government's mandate, the mandate of Municipal and Community Affairs and to Municipal and Community Affairs business plan commitments. And it's an active living framework because the intention is that it would really go beyond just the concepts of sport and recreation. The speaking notes highlight how important physical activity is for all aspects of cognitive health and mental well-being in adults and children. But active living kind of goes beyond that to a very holistic definition of physical, social, mental, and spiritual well-being. And so that's why the decision was made not to call it a sport, physical activity, and recreation policy, but to call it an active living framework. Help me, Gary. Top button? Thank you. Okay. I'm out of practice on some of this stuff. So the background talks a little bit about how we got to where we are today, and it notes, of course, there are many players in the active living landscape in the Northwest Territories. There are a few key territorial and regional organizations and territorial sport organizations who play a really foundational key role. MACA is responsible for funding, coordination, oversight, policy development. And then there are, of course, schools and businesses and nonprofit organizations. But the key partners, the territorial and regional organizations, are non-government organizations. And so although they work closely with MACA, they have their own mandate, they have their own focus, which has evolved over time. And about 20 years ago, in fact, when I was Deputy Minister of MACA at the time, there was really a sense that among those territorial and regional organizations, there was a lot of competition for funding, probably some duplication of programming, some real silos that could be broken down. And that led to a facilitated process which resulted in establishing a Sport and Recreation Council, starting about 2005, 2006. The intention was to have an umbrella organization that would drive collaboration, drive some shared services, and in addition, that organization took over administration of the lotteries from Sport North Foundation. They set up a competitive application process for the territorial and regional organizations and the territorial sport organizations to access the revenues from the Western Canada Lottery Program. It evolved then, about 8 years into their operation, as the Canada Revenue Agency flagged an issue with having an external organization administer lottery revenues. And that really was the driver for winding down the Sport and Recreation Council, bringing administration of the lottery into the department. And at that time, the minister committed to developing a sport, physical activity, and recreation policy that would set priorities and drive funding in the system. So this slide just gives you the details that are included in the amended legislation that was amended in 2018 to really ensure that lottery revenues were used for specific purposes related to active living. And since 2016, the key territorial and regional organizations have received stable funding out of the lottery revenues. The Sport and Recreation Council did a final wind-up report in 2016 where they recommended that the competitive funding application process they had established was not effective, that it was creating instability among the key partners. They were getting different amounts of funding every year. They were competing for funding. And they recommended a funding approach that would provide stable funding based on a percentage of lottery revenues at the time. So since 2016, the key organizations have shared a pot of funding of about $2.7 million, as you see on your, broken down on your speaking notes there. A really key fact, though, is that the territorial organizations, the Indigenous Sports Circle, Recreation and Parks Association, Sport North Federation, have leveraged almost an equal amount of funding. So in 24-25, they leveraged over $2 million in funding from, almost $1 million from Canada, an additional $400,000 from other GNWT programs, $200,000 from their national organizations, and almost $200,000 in fees and registrations. So GNWT is really getting value for money out of this. Thank you. So the active living framework itself, again, the minister had committed in 2016 that there would be a policy to guide the sector. It took a little while to get that going. There was, of course, a lot of work associated with transitioning lotteries back into the department. There was an election. There was a bit of a false start with some work done that was not really acceptable to the key partners, and the minister said, we're going to listen to your concerns and start again, and then there was COVID. So it was really 2022 before I was brought into the process and asked by MACA to help facilitate some public engagement on developing a sector-wide policy. That happened in 2023, and it included Indigenous governments, territorial sport organizations, NGOs, community champions, and community people who hadn't been involved in as champions but had very clear views. The feedback from that engagement was consistent, although there's an interest in continuing to support high-performance multi-sport games. The priority universally identified was more opportunities for physical activity that are open to everyone, that get out to all communities, that include people of all ages and all ability levels. And so out of that engagement, there were 6 clear priority areas for action. You see them on the slide, and there was really very little disagreement. These themes emerged again and again on what people want to see the government focusing on. They were captured in a What We Heard report in 2023 that was sent out and validated. And once that was completed, MACA invited the key territorial and regional organizations who they had been working closely with to co-create the active living framework. So that work was done with Indigenous Sport Circle, Sport North Federation, Recreation and Parks, and the Mackenzie Recreation Association, as well as MACA Sport Rec and Youth folks. And a really big point that I can't emphasize enough how important this is when that draft framework was done in the summer of 2023, the boards of all those NGOs signed off on it. They approved it, the minister of MACA approved it. That would not have happened 20 years ago. I mean, that's a real sea change in collaboration in the sector. And so the framework, as you see in your notes, really just sort of, it's a high-level policy. It sets out a roadmap for the sector, but it doesn't say how, and that's implementation was the next step. In 2024, MACA actually formally formalized the role of those territorial and regional partners into an advisory committee with very clear terms of reference. And their terms of reference included developing together a strategy with shared actions but specific deliverables, and a monitoring and evaluation plan. And so that group has worked over the last year. The first meeting was held in April 2024, and there has been very concrete progress in producing a draft action plan, a draft monitoring and evaluation framework, and even having gone so far as to develop reporting templates that all the partners have agreed to use in their reporting to MACA. So we don't have time to go into a lot of details, but the draft action plan was challenging because often in government, when you have a new initiative and you have an action plan, there's new funding to go along with it. That was not the case here. So what the group did was looked at the existing suite of programs and activities and tried to identify where are there gaps, what actions are foundational, what do we need to do to drive change, and what can we do within existing resources. And that resulted in a 3-year action plan that has not yet been sent forward for approval because we wanted to do the work of doing the evaluation plan to go with it, and make sure it's measurable, and that work really just wound up in the last couple of months. So future direction, there's a lot of challenges in the sector. The partner organizations have not seen a change in their funding in almost 10 years. Lottery revenues, as you know, are flat. The impact of the cost of living has really hit organizations hard. And so having looked at the action plan and working with MACA to say, what are the priorities? Partners are really looking at starting with some areas that will explore options for efficiencies within the sector that will reduce the administrative burden that they have for their proposal application and reporting to MACA, and really allow setting up a system so that we can track progress, see if we're making progress, see if we're making change. But the financial challenges will continue in the sector, and so that's going to some degree limit the ability to implement the full scope of the action plan. And I will now turn it over to Allison.
Thank you, Debbie. We're now going to shift into the NWT sport integrity system. I believe it's fair to say we as friends, parents, aunts, and uncles all want sports to be safe. The NWT Safe Sport Framework is how we are implementing the leading practice of sport integrity, including safety concerns such as concussions. The term safe sport refers broadly to everybody's right to participate in sport free from maltreatment and human rights violations. The Canadian safe sport environment is still evolving. All jurisdictions are working to strengthen sport integrity through consistent policies, training and awareness, and independent accountability measures. The GNWT is advancing priorities from the Safe Sport Framework developed in 2021 in collaboration with territorial sport organizations, or TSOs, to foster safer, more accountable sport environments in the NWT prior to the renewal of funding agreements April 1st, 2026. This work has included supporting sport organizations in preparing and adopting consistent sport integrity policies, including concussion policies and return to play protocols, minimum screening and training requirements, and independent third-party mechanisms for complaints of maltreatment in sport. Implementing safe or sport integrity is crucial, but we recognize the challenge many of our sport organizations face with limited capacity and time, especially as many are volunteer-led organizations. In response, MACA has partnered with Sport North Federation and the Indigenous Sports Circle to support the sector's implementation efforts. Key needs identified at this year's Sport North meetings in May 2025 included from Sport Law, a group of sport-related experts in Canada, directly engaging with the TSOs. We identified 3 priority areas. 1, governance support, including updating bylaws and understanding their sport requirements, and guidance on internal structures needed to adopt integrity policies. 2, clarifying roles, including better understanding of the distinct responsibilities of organizations within our sports system. And 3, improved collaboration and sharing resources, including interest in shared tools with possibilities of registration systems, screening, and criminal records databases. And an idea of leveraging shared mechanisms for appeals and compliance. With next steps, this feedback will guide how we continue to support organizations and strengthen integrity in the NWT. As mentioned, all GNWT-funded sport organizations will be required to include an independent third-party mechanism to investigate maltreatment under the UCCMS, or Universal Code of Conduct to prevent and address maltreatment in sport, as agreed to by all ministers of sport across Canada. Independent mechanisms assure allegations of maltreatment are addressed professionally and neutrally. It supports a system based on compassion, confidentiality, and objectivity, principles critical to public trust, and the Safe Sport Framework. Sport organizations do not have to use the service the GNWT has contracted. However, to ensure all organizations from dog sledding to hockey are able to provide a complaint mechanism, MACA has established a 3-year contract with Alias, an independent service provider. Alias can provide the third-party mechanism to receive and manage allegations of maltreatment in sport for members of funded NWT sport organizations. The TSO's discipline and complaint policy and their appeals policy will guide this process. Complaints can be submitted online or by phone, and communication resources will be shared with the funded organization, including posters and social media posts, to help inform their members of the mechanism when it's available to them. Current status: all GNWT sport organizations have received a report from Sport Law reviewing their current governance for readiness and alignment with the sport integrity policies, including interdependencies with national sport organizations or linked provincial organizations such as Swim Alberta. A template of the 7 mandatory sport integrity policies, as well as highly recommended policies such as social media and event discipline, have been shared. And we've set up the system to allow these organizations that are ready to start onboarding prior to April 1st when they're ready. The alias mechanism will be launched by each organization once TSOs agree to work with alias and the GNWT, their bylaws and policies are approved, and the TSOs have a public website or platform to share the required information for board meetings and minutes and any public decisions on sanctions following a UCCMS complaint investigation. Thank you, and we look forward to any questions on the active living or safe sport framework implementation plan next steps.
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. I'll turn it over to committee members. Committee, does anyone have questions for the minister or staff? Okay, just waiting for members online. I'll ask a couple questions of my own. One of the things that stood out to me, it was early in the presentation, Ms. Delancey, noted that there was stable funding going to these organizations, but also spoke to the fact that funding is flatlined. And of course, we discussed just recently in session and approved a $1.8 million supplemental estimate to supplement the lotteries fund, which didn't have enough money to cover all of our expenses. So I guess the first question I have is just about the stability of that funding and what the plan is high level to address that gap, because I see the department bringing in sort of a new framework with lots of activities, but we don't seem to have the money to deliver those services. So have we got a plan for stabilizing that fund?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if I could maybe get the deputy minister to address the question first, and then maybe he can hand it off to Mr. Delancey.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so, yeah, good question. One we knew was coming, but yet I got no notes here. However, so we're in a situation now where we, identified a gap in our funding. We came back through the, government processes, and we did get the $1.8 million SUP, which was great, and that was for funding of the next Arctic Winter Games. What our plan is now is to go back into our system. Active Living Framework is timely, but maybe a little bit behind in terms of where we are. We had hoped that we'd be able to use the Active Living Framework to readjust our funding going forward, but right now we're just starting the implementation, as just noted in the presentation. So what we want to do is do a bit of dive into our system and say, come back and say, what do we need to do to make our system sustainable? Right now, we know it's not sustainable with our current level of funds. It was noted in the presentation that our Western Canada Lottery funds have flatlined. So our numbers are pretty stable, though, and with the exception of COVID or a wildfire year, that was a dip in funding there, but otherwise it's been pretty stable. But our cost of living has increased significantly, so travel in particular. One of the things we've seen in multi-sport games is cost of charters has gone up exponentially, and just the cost of doing business in general across across Canada and North America has gone up, and we're seeing that impact in our sports system as well. So our plan now is to make a plan. So we are going to start looking at it, reviewing our sports system and what do we need to do as the government of our territories to make the fund and the sports system sustainable going forward. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so I guess, I mean, that makes it clear that there isn't a plan. I mean, has the GNWT, so knowing that they had to come forward for a supplemental estimate already, I guess, has the GNWT considered like stabilizing the fund with any GNWT funds? Or I know the minister at a high level has kind of started looking at the online gaming and whether that could potentially help with revenues, but it just seems like the deficit was fairly large, so I don't think $1.8 million, I don't know if that was an annual need, but that kind of money is not just going to come out of the air. So I am curious to hear a bit more. I mean, it sounds like you're just at the start of the planning stage, so you probably aren't able to answer a lot of supplemental questions, but I am kind of curious to just to better understand this issue and what planning is. So I'll put that as a question now, but I guess I would just say I think committee will be interested to hear back from the department as that planning is going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and I think a lot of this needs to, well, we need to definitely look at it more and see where the impacts are going to be. I mean, you're right, people are spending less on lotteries as not much as they used to, and we have to find other solutions. So, yeah, and I think, yeah, if we can get back and let you know what the potential avenue is and how we're going to continue supporting sports and rec and stuff through these spots. So I don't know if the deputy minister wanted to add anything to it, but I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, just to add to what the minister said, I mean, one of the options is to come back through the business planning process to seek out additional funding to help stabilize the fund, and that's something we're considering with a business planning cycle coming up very shortly. At the same time, I think that we need to let the active living framework play out a little bit as well, because that's going to help us distribute the current funds that we have. We know there's no funds associated with the framework, but once it's implemented and over a couple of years, we'll have more ability to, I guess, substantiate decisions to how we're funding organizations, TSOs right now, and to where that funding could be redistributed. I'm not quite sure what the answers will be, but we'll have some, I guess, some data to support better decision-making going forward there. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reid, you had some questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the minister and his staff for and the presenters to come in today and discuss this important work with us. Just following on the thread that you've started, Mr. Chair, I'm curious if the minister has had any, preliminary chats with specifically the Minister of Finance, but also say the Minister of EC&E. It's always been notable to me in my adult life here in the territory that sports, arts, these are areas of our lives that are thought of as extras. The funding sometimes dries up, as we're seeing here. And yeah, a great deal of that can be impacted by travel and the needs of our athletes and artists to tour and travel and get to these opportunities outside the territory that help them develop and grow. But has there been any contemplation on the part of the minister around and with his cabinet colleagues, and especially now that the Minister of Finance is out on budget dialogues with NGOs, with territorial organizations such as these TSOs, arts organizations, to start thinking in maybe more innovative ways of how we can find capacity and find funding that works for our athletes and for our NGOs at large. Just wondering if there's any bigger conversations going on. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Over to the minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to put a simple answer to that, yes, those conversations are constantly going on between my cabinet colleagues and also through the department and the NGOs. So there's all these conversations happening on how we can improve funding within the sports organizations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Reid, follow up.
Yeah, and thank you to the minister for that. I know this is an area he's very passionate about. I'm wondering if maybe he or his staff know outside of necessarily the presentation that's happening today, but is there any sort of timeline that organizations can start to see some changes to funding structures to better support them? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Over to the minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything at the top of my head right now, but we are we are looking at other options on how we can improve funding our TSOs and our sports organizations. I've most recently had a conversation with the Minister of ECE. So, these conversations are consistently happening so that we can try to stabilize funding to our sports organizations. Although it doesn't look like it, sports is a pretty passionate thing for me. I do play some, but I do believe that sports are important to the healthy lifestyle of residents in Northwest Territories. And if they're healthy, if they're active, we tend to have less visits to the hospital, and we definitely tend to have less other things like crime and stuff like that. So it is a passion of mine to keep these organizations funded properly and active. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan?
Ms. Reed was done. I don't want to interrupt, but.
She had 2 questions, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I have a couple questions. One is just to confirm and clarify, in terms of the budgeting, I know in our supplementary estimates that we recently passed in the May sitting, we allocated an extra $1.8 million to the Physical Activity, Sport and Recreation Fund, and we were told that was specifically to ensure that there was enough money for Arctic Winter Games to move ahead, that was the deficit or shortfall specifically for Arctic Winter Games. Can you just clarify, I know we've talked a lot about declining funding with the Lotteries Fund. Are there any other sports initiatives or organizations that are suffering sort of less funding than they need this year? I know you've sort of said in general things are fairly stable, but is it that the entire deficit was attributed to Arctic Winter Games and we sort of topped that up and now we're back at par, or were there other aspects of physical activity and sport that also had to, are suffering deficits and are just sort of trying to make do now with less money than before, if that makes sense? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Over to the Minister and his staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask the Deputy Minister if he can answer that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the member for the question. So, so that $1.8 million was specific to the Arctic Winter Games. So Arctic Winter Games and all multi-sport games are funded out of the fund, the PASER fund. And we are at a point now where there's a limit established in the legislation for the fund, and we were approaching that limit, so we had to get more funding to be able to afford the Arctic Winter Games. So that money was approved and in the budget for next year. Just to clarify again, Lotteries funding is not decreasing, it is stable, so just want to make sure that we're put that on the table here. However, cost of living, cost of doing business is increasing for all of our partner organizations. We've been approached by multiple organizations for more funding because the cost of doing the same things costs more, so therefore funding stays stable, so you do less. Some of those organizations have been able to leverage some of the funding that we have and get more creative, I guess, to deliver same programs. So while their funding is the same and there's no intention of decreasing the funding, certainly I would say that they are feeling pressure to do the same thing. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morgan, follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a different line of questioning for a follow-up, but hopefully you'll indulge me. So around the Safe Sport initiative, I am obviously really supportive of this, and I am very, involved and supportive of sports and physical activity myself. This is like a value that I do hold dear. I'm also aware that there's a tension when it comes to risk management. On the one hand, we absolutely want safe sport and to prevent concussions and injuries, but I think sometimes people are also scared away from physical activity because of the perceived risks of, oh my gosh, we can't do this because what if someone gets hurt, or what if someone falls down, or what if, and especially when they're small volunteer organizations, that sometimes people get overwhelmed very quickly with all of the perceived risks. Oh, and then this is too hard and we shouldn't do it at all because it seems too risky, and what about liability? And this is sometimes a reason why things don't get off the ground at all. And I wonder if you have ways to work with organizations to do sort of risk management planning, to help people understand that you're never going to be able to totally eliminate risk, and that, you know, risk can really vary and be relative to the activity. Not all physical activity and sports are as, you know, people are at high risk of, say, a concussion as some other sports. So just to be able to sort of weigh and take things into perspective, and then to be able to move forward with activities with like a reasonable risk management perspective, but everyone realizing that this doesn't mean that you'll ever be able to guarantee that no one will ever get hurt. And that's, so just to help people work through risk management without this idea that the point is to eliminate all risk, or that, you know, and also reinforcing the framework that lack of physical activity also poses major risks to our health, right? So whenever we think about risk, it's usually the risk of doing something, but we often forget about the risk of not doing anything. If we don't have kids' sports, if we don't take kids out on the land, if we don't do these things, actually the risks are often much higher of like health problems and physical and social problems. So I'm just wondering how you can help, especially small and volunteer-run organization, work through weighing different risks and better equip them to be able to move forward with these initiatives in a safe way, and get a better handle on risk management. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start, and then if Allison wants to add to this, she can, or the deputy minister. But I think just to point out, a lot of these organizations that are the sports groups that exist have national bodies that they work under, or they affiliate with. So there's usually coaching programs. There's safe play programs, stuff like that with like hockey, and then there's also, along with that, there's also your insurance with your organization, and all these things are in place and designed to try to make sport safer and allow organizations like any sports organization to run safely. I think the goal is to try to educate people on safe play, safe sport, but also making sure that they know the resources are out there for them. So there's other organizations out there that can support them, and that within the Northwest Territories, for an example, the NGOs that we have, the Northwest Territories Sport North, Indigenous Sports Circle, all those organizations that assist sports in the NWT. So with that being said, I mean, for us in the Northwest Territories, the small we are, I think there's the communication aspect where if you're part of an organization, you're going to connect with people that will help guide you through, getting set up with these programs and stuff like that. So, yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's there's a risk with everything we do, but I think these organizations have the things in place to support safe play and safe sport and all that stuff. So I don't know if Allison wanted to add anything to that.
Mr. Brennan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And just to add to what the minister said, and I want to highlight what's something that the member said as well, is that, yeah, we truly believe that the risk of not participating in sport or recreation programs is way riskier than the opposite. And I wish we had some data to support that, right? We believe that funding youth in communities, building strong communities, building healthy communities, keeps these kids out of the justice system or the health system or whatever the case may be. So we wish we had more money to contribute to these activities, because we do believe it's very, very important. I think in terms of safe sport, I just want to clarify and make sure that we understand that safe sport is like, yeah, there's a risk analysis done at the front end, but safe sport is helping us identify when something happens, there's an injury, so for example, that they're treated properly. So in hockey, there's a lot of talk about concussions and people playing right afterwards, and you see it in professionals, you see it in young kids. I myself have a child who suffered multiple concussions in the sport they chose and had to recover, and we had no concerns. It was dressed properly. Lots of times it isn't because of pressure put on kids to participate, right? So I just want to make sure that I think that's where we're leaning towards a safe sport is, and also, of course, making sure that folks are treated the same with diversity and whatnot. So I don't have much information on risk analysis, but I'll turn it over to Alice and let her add a few more comments if she has some. Thanks.
Yeah.
The mics kind of shift around on you
Okay.
sometimes. It's, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, not so much as risk management. Well, what we're trying to do with our current implementation is we identified that a lot of our organizations have really outdated policies and governance. So some of the bylaws were coming from the 80s. Some of them can only find the odd pages, not the even pages. So we really found that we really wanted to support the organizations in understanding what their responsibilities are and what they were taking on, and including all these policies as a manual or a handbook that they can go to when there is an issue. We don't want anything to happen. We prefer it to be about education and putting all these things in place, but when it does, issues do happen, that they can go and pull this policy and they know exactly where to go. And follow things. So that's part of helping with risk management, not specific.
Okay, thank you. Further questions from committee? Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a quick follow-up comment, you were, the Deputy Minister was referring to, like, if we had more evidence or data to point to. I can forward on some data, which I think is related and helpful around, from my background more in like outdoor education and risky play, but there's been data that's been compiled around the risks to children of like not doing like outdoor physical play or versus actually doing kinds of like hands-on risky play outside that's more active. So there has been some data compiled in terms of health risks and this kind of thing, comparing one or the other, that I can forward through committee if that would be helpful to the department just to be able to refer to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, one that I wanted to ask about is just, can you help me understand better? So I understand that this framework doesn't include the multi-sport games, but my rudimentary understanding of how the Lotteries Fund works is also that the games eat up kind of the lion's share of sport funding. Can you just help us understand? So we've got a policy framework to help, I'm using your words here, help inform funding for the sector. And one of the key I'll go with that as the first question. Can you just help us understand, like, if the games aren't included in this framework, but the games are using a majority of the funding, can you help us better understand how this framework is going to help us choose to allocate funding? Because it sounds like the framework is going to help us allocate what's left of the funding, knowing that games are eating up quite a bit of it. Is there a framework that informs how we fund the games also? Like, can you help us better understand that separation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll see if staff in there are able to answer that for you there.
Yeah, I'll take the first crack and then I'll ask Mr. Delancey to fill in the blanks. So, yeah, so the games funding definitely costs a lot of money, but it's not the lion's share of our funding. So the funding for the sport and rec system, I don't have the number here, unfortunately. I think it's somewhere to the tune of $10 to $12 million per year over our system. And that doesn't include funding that we give to communities. So we also fund communities for sport and rec through their annual funding, O&M funding that they get. That's not including it in any funding that we're talking about here. But in the sport and rec system, we have various programs for funding other items that are, so for example, we fund territorial sport organizations directly. So that's your NWT soccer, softball, volleyball, whatever the case may be. So we fund those directly. The amount of fund, and I don't know what the average amount per year is for multi-sport games, because the games are not set, well, they're on set schedules, but sometimes you have 2 in one fiscal year, and sometimes you have 0, right? So it's averaged over the course of time. I think that number is somewhere in the tune of $1.5, $1.8 million on average, out of the $10 to $12 million that's available in the system. I could have those numbers off by a little bit, but I don't think it's materially different than that there. So, and while the active living framework is not specific to the multi-sport games, I think the active living framework is looking at all of our funding pots that we have. Why do we spend so much money in Arctic Winter Games? Because it's valuable. We have a policy that now recognizes the need for higher performance, right? So we're trying to have an overarching policy that helps us decide where all of our funding is going to go in the future. Is it grassroots? Is it high performance? Those types of things, and how do we find that balance to make this best for the NWT? I'm going to stop there. I'm going to ramble, so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Delancey.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just pick up on your last point, the Deputy Minister's last point, which is about setting priorities. I think in 2016, there was no vision that lottery revenues would flatten and possibly have bad years. So the commitment to develop a policy that would help the government set priorities was also made at a time when there was kind of an assumption that lottery revenues would keep growing, and that has not been the case. But I think at its most simplistic, if you look at the purposes in the Act that the lottery fund is to be used for, there's developing, coaching, and supporting high-performance athletes, which are discrete streams of activity, and then there's promote and deliver, physical activity, sport and recreation, advanced physical activity, sport and recreation. So really the Act envisioned 2 broad spheres of activity for the fund, and the Active Living Framework addresses one of those broad spheres. But I go back to what the Deputy Minister said. In the public engagement, there was a very clear priority emerged that grassroots investment was what everybody agrees is the first and most important area based on what Ms. Morgan said in terms of health and well-being.
Okay, thank you. And I think, yeah, I appreciate that answer and noted that in the presentation too. And I think I generally agree with that I think we need to be prioritizing the activities that are promoting the most kind of activity, the grassroots activity that's happening in the communities, the stuff that's getting kids active. Just knowing that, I think there is probably a changing attitude towards some of the games. And I just mean games generally. I think of the Olympics, things like that, just because we live in a world now where traveling for such things has gotten so much more expensive. It's going to eat up a lot more funding to do things like that. And we might have to kind of rethink that and, what are our big goals for sports? So I appreciate the focus on grassroots and would encourage, us to think about that in terms of how we're funding. But just as follow-up, I really would appreciate if the department could share with committee as follow-up some more information on the fund, where the funding is allocated, and help us better understand why the supplementary estimate was needed and how this framework is going to relate to funding allocation and stabilizing the fund. That would be helpful information. I realize that's a fairly large ask, but if the department can get back to us in time, that would be appreciated. So I'll turn that over to the minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure everybody there is nodding their head, and I'm agreeing. We'll get back, get some information for you, the committee, and then get it off to you guys there. Thank you.
Okay. Appreciate that commitment. Are there any further questions from committee before we draw the briefing to a close? Just giving members half a second online to indicate whether they have questions or not. Okay, I'm not seeing any
No, thank
questions. Okay, thank you, Ms. Reed. So seeing no further questions, that does bring an end to the briefing. Minister McKay, I'll give you and your staff the opportunity for any closing remarks or final thoughts if you have any to share.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, just thanks to the committee for allowing us and the staff to present this stuff here. And, I just want to say thanks to the staff for the work, the contractor for the work, and thanks to our NGOs and our sports organizations for contributing to this work. And that's pretty much it. Have a good weekend to you, the committee, and everybody else there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And that brings our broadcast and our very busy committee week to a close on this fine Friday afternoon. So I wish everyone else, or everybody, a great weekend. To staff, anybody tuning in, and the minister and MLAs too. Thank you.